is, misclassification. We're seeing a balloon squeeze. Where is the spend going? Is that become rogue spend? How does that organisation help those people and those programs do a really, really good job? So there's a field base inside the business piece of work that Pontoon Instinct delivers to our program teams. Then there is the external piece of perhaps customers that don't have an MSP, could be self-managed, are considering an MSP, have a problem to solve, might not even know the problem that they're trying to solve. And Jay and his team, from a consultative perspective, an advisory perspective, can help them. We've got a lot of data, a lot of experience, a lot of tooling available to us where we can go in and, beyond the traditional maturity assessments, which I smile about because I think they too need, really looking at. Anybody talking about a maturity assessment today is almost like a manual car, right? Getting next to a Waymo. It's like, okay, yeah, well, you both go on the road, you both do similar things, but the way you get there is a very, very different experience. So digitizing an experience for a customer in saying, okay, we can understand the challenges that you're facing, and under our advisory organisation with Jay and his team, bring Pontoon Instinct into the frame and say, yeah, look, here's your VMS technology, you're utilising only 30% of its capability. Here's some additional technologies you might want to consider within your ecosystem that solve for these problems. And this is how you can go from, let's say, generation 1 to a generation 5 without changing vendor or without changing what you're doing. So for us, it's not really a sales organisation. It's about really trying to help customers and potential customers or folks in the marketplace understand, what's your roadmap? Where do you want to get to? Do you have an agentic strategy as an organisation? What can you absorb? You talked about, some organisations being mature. Some highly regulated banking customers can't take our technologies into their own environments. They just can't do it. It's, not going to work for them. So how do we then create an ecosystem within our environment that gives them the same value and impact without compromising their own security? So, highly regulated industries like pharmaceutical, for example, what can they accept? What can they adopt? What can they accommodate? We can come up with great ideas, and we often do. And they're like, yeah, that's great, but we can't do that. So how do we then allow that consumability? Is that a word? Did I just make up a word?
Let's
consumability.
Go with it. I like it. It's
We'll run with it.
It's a bit like bounce back ability, isn't it? I like it.
Oh yeah, bounce back ability. How do we get them to be able to consume the value of that advancement without compromising their own environments or their own ability or risk levels of accepting connectivity? You guys have done an amazing job on your API work, right? Making it so easy to connect. But the way in which bilateral connectivity drives so much more value, a lot of clients still can't go bilateral. So we've got to figure all those types of things out. And I think the speed at which we're operating might be a bit too fast for some customers, so we have to slow down. But I never want to be in a place where an incumbent customer, and I've heard this before in my career, says, you guys are just not very innovative.
Right.
And that's so frustrating, particularly in today's market where, and this is why, again, Pontoon Instinct is so important. It's working with our service leaders, David Orm on the services procurement side, Francis, and I'm not going to say his surname because I always brutalise it. Lubitsch, thank you. They are responsible for understanding what the art of the possible is, but also testing us and pushing us further and faster. When you connect them from a service line perspective with innovation and product, getting those two together and then with a customer in the middle is really, really important. So the speed at which we can move and the adoption cycle of what we can and can't do, I think, is dictated by the customer risk profile and the customer's own IT landscape and how they can and cannot consume or adopt external technologies. Again, I've kind of pivoted a little bit, but that is a big part of the Instinct service offering. A number of pillars, technology being a key one, but then how do we consistently evolve as a service provider where technology plays such a significant role in who we are? We're not a tech company, and we're not going to pretend to be one and don't want to be one, but we also then have to be positioned in this agentic world as not a tech company, but a company providing technology solutions. So there's this dichotomy of how do we position ourselves? And I think the MSP provider of today is going to have to be really, really different in how we show up. And my analogy is running shoes. You look at those carbon running shoes today, I look like, if I was going to put that, I think I'd roll my ankle, you know? They look really uncomfortable, but we've just seen the TCS London Marathon break a record that is just almost, you think about that 10 years ago, how much of that was the shoe?
The person that came second broke the 2-hour marathon and they didn't win.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you imagine that?
It's crazy, yeah.
But the shoe played such a role. But they're a runner. They're not defined by their shoe. And I see the MSP world as the runner defined by the technologies that they're deployed. And I think they become more and more and more important. But I still wouldn't put one of those sneakers on because I'm absolutely sure I would roll my ankle.
Well, it's how the MSP leverages the technology and how they leverage it on behalf of the customer. You know, you talk about security environments. We do some really interesting work in some secure sectors, and it's required a lot of work on our behalf to be in a position to be able to do that. But it's unlocked some really interesting opportunities. And you do get these situations, particularly in highly regulated, safety critical type industries, where they need to push the problem out to somebody else to say, we can't bring this in-house, it's just not going to happen. Yeah. But as long as the correct security parameters are in place, we can pass that problem on to somebody else and get them to make that happen. So I think that's really interesting in the way that the technology is an enabler. That's how I view what we're doing around services procurement. We're an enabler for an MSP service provision to organise and manage a client's services procurement spend. We are the enabling technology within a solution, as are other technology providers in the industry. They're enabling that solution. So I think that is part of the value, and it's a big part of how MSPs, as you say, show up and take their proposition to market. But I think the other element to it, which you were discussing earlier, problem discovery. You know, surfacing the problems, really, you know, helping organisations understand themselves. It's like, you know, I think a lot of the time if people go and have some sort of therapy, if they're struggling with someone, a big part of that journey is understanding themselves better, more effectively. And I think when you look at, certainly from a services procurement angle in new areas like how organisations manage agents, and when you look at the total workforce scenario, it's very important to go back to that problem statement. What are we trying to achieve? What are the things that are holding us back? What are we scared of? What don't we understand? That just helps shape the solution. I really, certainly with services procurement, as I know you and I have discussed this before, we've learned over the last few years, you don't try and just sell a solution to somebody. It's really about understanding what their problem is, going through the journey with them. In services procurement, there are probably 10 major pain points that almost every organisation will have, but different organisations will recognise them very differently in terms of priority. Different people within organisations, someone from an operational perspective or a procurement perspective or a compliance perspective or the buyer's perspective, will have very, very different views on whether misclassification is a bigger pain than writing a scope of work, or, you know, managing, you know, avoiding rogue spend, or, you know, standardizing compliance or whatever it might be. So I think just understanding the problem that's where it's not a cookie cutter service that we're looking at here. When you look at how an organization gets work done, it's quite unique to that organization. How they leverage these different channels, as you said, their level of maturity, their level of sophistication. They need intermediaries like you guys in the MSP world to be innovating at a very high level. It doesn't mean they can start there, but in terms of that advisory capability and what you can bring to them, maybe you can help shape how they adapt to some of that innovation, because some of it is easier for them to adapt to than they might realize, but they just don't have the capacity to do it themselves.